Inmate B50967 woke up the same way he did most days, to the sound of jingling tags. He had dreamed about his first kill. Not the ones he had written about in that stupid journal, but the very first kill he'd ever made. Before he had been inmate B50967, before he had been Officer Cribbs, even before he had been Christopher Cribbs, star running back for the Kashmir High Wendigos, he had been Chris Cribbs, an overweight 12-year-old with a crush. His crush, Maggie Thornton, had been beautiful. She was a grade ahead of him, with long red hair, freckles, and skin the color of cream. She, however, was popular, and Chris was just a fat little boy who collected Pokemon cards and smelled like milk. That hadn't stopped him from asking her out, right there at lunch where everyone could see. And when she had laughed at him, they had all laughed at him. That had kindled a fire in him, something hot and hateful, and when she caught him following her home, she showed no fear of this four-eyed little squirt. "I told you, Crisco, I don't want to go out with you. Why don't you go home and eat some..." But her words fell off when he shoved her sideways, sending her sprawling down the hill that fell off into the woods. She had screamed as she fell, but not for very long. He had found her near the base. Her head had hit a big rock down there, and instead of taking her to the hospital or making up a story for the police, Chris had dragged her to an old, falling-apart cabin he knew of that was not far from the school. He ran there often, especially when the bigger kids picked on him, and it was as good as a second home to him. He hid her there, amidst the trees and the splintery boards, and for a while, Chris played house. He liked this time. She was his ever-present, ever-doting wife, and he was the hard-working man just waiting to come home. He fed her, talked to her, he fulfilled many of the desires he had long repressed, and she lived for another week. She didn't move, she didn't talk, but he could see her eyes moving when he came back to bring her food and things, and that was fine. He came twice a day, before and after school, and her eyes were always hopeful, always pleading, as he tricked himself into thinking that she was happy to see him. She was his first everything, and they experienced so much in that week. It was not, however, meant to last. He came home one afternoon, her eyes sluggishly flicking to him, and suddenly he was filled with need. He had thought about her beautiful face all day at school, and suddenly he wanted nothing so much as to have her again. She was filthy. He hadn't bathed her or changed her in a week, but he hardly cared. She was all his, and that was enough for him. He moved closer, intending to kiss her before they moved on to other things, but her eyes stopped him dead in his tracks. What he had seen had filled him with a rage hotter than the embers he'd felt before, and a deep and profound sadness. As she lay there, her eyes boring into him, he had seen her hate, her disgust, and her wish for his death in her perfect green eyes. How could she feel like this? He had saved her, taken care of her, and this was how she repaid him. Oh, sure, she could flirt with Kevin Jacobs or Kendrick Hedges. She could tease any member of the football team or any of the baseball boys, but she couldn't summon up the time of day for Chris Cribbs. Suddenly he felt his rage matching hers. Well, if that was how it was, then he decided that she could just try her luck without him. She was beginning to stink anyway, and he left that day and never came back. He thought about it a few times, but he made himself stay away. She didn't deserve him. She was nothing but a whore. That's what his father called them, and he had just realized it. Maybe she died there, maybe she didn't, but to his knowledge, they never found her body, and she remained a missing person to this day. Sometimes he wondered if her bones still sat in that house, the only resident of a dilapidated ruin. It was probably just rotten wood and pine needles by now anyway. Something pawed at his face, the jingling getting louder, and inmate B50967 opened his eyes to see the old orange tomcat standing on his chest. "Good morning, Hermes," he growled, scratching the cat behind its remaining ear, like it liked, as he reached beneath the collar for his next list of orders. The first note he'd received, the one that had told him about Peter Remy, had told him the cat's name, though most inmates just called him Old One Ear. Hermes seemed a fitting name for something that served a god of death, ushering souls to the underworld through these little slips of paper. Whether that made him Charon or just another Cerberus, inmate B50967 didn't know, but what he did know was that whatever name was on that paper would get him one step closer to his freedom. He unrolled it, stared at the name, memorized it, before flushing it down the toilet. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low. Blonde man, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on his upper arm. Jesse tattoo on upper arm. That had been a common theme lately. B50967 wondered why, but he guessed it didn't really matter. They had a long sentence, and the warden needed them dead. That was all that really mattered. He'd kill this one, and another one, and another, and go right on killing till he had his 12. That was the deal, and that was what he wanted to do. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde man, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on upper arm. He crumpled the note into a ball, working it between his hands as he did. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde man, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on upper arm. He tossed it into the toilet, repeating the information like a mantra. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde hair, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on upper arm. He flushed the toilet as the lights came on overhead, signaling another day in prison. B50967 dressed, strapping his knife on in a place where it wouldn't be noticed. He had altered his pants just so, getting the pattern just right so it wouldn't be noticed unless someone was searching him. It was no different than arming to go into public, and as long as nothing looked amiss, then no one would stop you. He had a knife on his left side, a knife in his right waistband, as well as a secret pocket high up on his left inner thigh, where most COs wouldn't search. This was where he kept his important things. He had stolen a key from one of the maintenance guys, a key that would open most of the doors on the dorms, as well as some chemicals to make components that would blind people or choke them up. He had these hidden in that pocket, out of sight, but still close, and he suspected that he might need them to kill inside E-dorm again. "Chow!" said a loud voice overhead, the speaker crackling as the CO called for chow. "Line up for chow if you're eating." B50967 took one last look at his gear before heading out, closing his door behind him. There were more goodies inside the cell, and he really didn't need anyone getting curious and trying to find them. Anything they could turn up in that cell would get him a quick trip to confinement, but he knew that that was temporary. He had a life, multiple lives, so what was 30 days for a weapons charge or 90 days for assault? The worst thing they could do was catch him at his murder, and that would be a quick trip elsewhere. If he were at another facility, transferred for killing an inmate, the deal would be off, and he would be stuck. He had to be quiet, he had to be smart, and he had to be careful. He queued up for chow, the officer letting them into the sally port once they had enough of them to line up, and they piled up near the door like cattle in a chute. B50967 stayed back, however. He didn't like being amidst a crowd. These guys hadn't realized who he was just yet, and the ones who did knew enough to keep their mouths shut. He didn't want to catch a knife in the kidney just because of some long-ago slight back when he was Officer Cribbs. He stayed near the end, keeping his back to the wall, as he plastered on a dreamy look that had become his normal expression. "What you say, killer?" said a couple of them, earning a blank look before they wandered off. "Doper," he heard one of them whisper as he moved off, but he ignored it. B50967 didn't let it get to him. Let him think he was a doper. It had helped him kill Peter McCormick. Peter had been with this little group he was trailing, but he had also been fond of selling drugs on the side. Whatever gang he was with, they certainly had access to some substances, and he had set up a meeting with Pete to buy some stuff. It had been easy to mingle with a different dorm and get on the rec yard, easy to find an alley where Pete was selling his wares, and easy to stab him in the throat and push him into the rec yard toilet. He had left most of the blood in the bathroom too, which meant it would take them longer to find the body. The thing about Stragview was, despite the inherent danger of the work, many of the COs were complacent or just downright lazy. They could pass a count all night, only to discover at 3 a.m. that they didn't have as many inmates as they were supposed to, sparking a massive compound-wide count. Most of them wouldn't even notice if he went to another dorm for a few hours, and B50967 knew that. Had he ever been that blind? He didn't think so, but he supposed it was possible. Maybe Officer Cribbs had been blind, been lazy, and that was why he'd been caught. B50967 was not blind, however. He was the hunter, the killer, and he moved as stealthily as any jungle cat. They passed a line of E-dorm inmates on the way to Chow, close enough that he could have done the deed right there, but instead, he just marked his target as he shuffled by. It wasn't hard. The little orange shadow behind him marked him for who he was, and the guy was trying his best to shoo the one-eared Tom away. This was him. This was Mackenzie Daniels of E2, bunk 14 low. He of the blonde hair and the beard. He didn't make it obvious. He didn't want to tip him off, but he did mark him so that he could find him again when the time came. He went to Chow, he ate his chow, and he went back to his room, had the guard open his door for him, and went inside to plan. The best way would be to do it during rec, but how to get him without being noticed? He could find out more about him, wouldn't be that hard, but if he went to one of the loudmouths for information on a guy who turned up dead, then it would look really bad. It was unlikely that he could catch him like he had McCormick. McCormick had been a known user, but Daniels might prove to be clean and less likely to jump at the idea of dope. No, he'd have to figure something out if he was going to get him. But he had time. He had all the time in the world. Turned out it was time that he wouldn't need. At noon, B50967 was called to the pod door by Officer Cambridge. He was a little worried at first, thinking that someone had cottoned to his plans, but he could hardly refuse a verbal order to report. He came timidly from his cell, looking inquisitively at Cambridge as he shuffled close, the look of disgust hard to miss on the man's face. Cambridge had never liked Officer Cribbs, and now that he was inmate B50967, that hatred had been magnified. "Medical call out. Report to medical for examination." B50967 nodded, keeping his head low as he made to pass. Cambridge, however, wasn't done with him yet, and stepped into his path before he could get through the door. "Makes me sick to see you here. They should have given you the chair. I hope every day before I come in that I'll find out someone slit your throat for you in the night." B50967 didn't say anything. "Get out of my sight," Cambridge said, stepping aside and letting him go. B50967 stepped into the waiting room and realized that Providence had smiled on him. The waiting room was pretty full, the usual collection of hypochondriacs and whiners, but the empty seat just so happened to be next to Daniels. He was just sitting there, acting like he didn't have a price on his head, as calm as any deer in the woods before a hunter blows them away. He could see half of the Jesse tattoo on his right arm peeking from beneath the sleeve, and when B50967 took a seat next to him, his eyes got big. "Hey, aren't you that guy that used to work here?" B50967 stayed quiet, elbows on his knees, as he put on his best shell-shocked look and just stared at the back of the guy's head that sat in front of him. Yeah, it's you! You killed all those girls! Man, I bet you have some stories, don't you?" He kept his eyes forward, not engaging, as his other hand slipped towards the knife in its belt. Hey, it's okay. I don't care that you used to be a guard. I actually killed a girl too, to get here, except it was my sister. Stupid bitch, she tried to cut me out of the will. All she was good for was spreading her legs, and she wants to tell me I'm not getting anything? I didn't stand for that, and neither did you. Man, the other guys are going to flip when they hear I talk to you. B50967 processed what he had been told, forming a counterpoint, and already formulating a plan to get what he wanted. "Sorry," he said raspily. "Most people don't want to talk to me, so I'm kind of out of practice. They usually hate me because I was a guard or because I killed women." Nah, I get it. Sometimes they just need killing. They don't know their place, and yeah, you know?" he said, smacking a fist into his palm. Yeah, B50967 said, looking away. I get it. Sometimes people just need someone to give them what's coming to them." They talked for a while, B50967 mostly just nodding. Daniels seemed more than willing to fill the gaps in the conversation. He had only killed one person, but it seemed he had thought about killing others. His mother, his girlfriend, some people at work, many others. As the room emptied out, slowly but surely, and as it did, B50967 excused himself to go to the bathroom. He came out a few minutes later, the needle carefully tucked between his fingers. This would have to be smooth, but he knew he could manage it. "Daniels, E52369, called the nurse, and as Daniels got up, B50967 stepped past him, saying it was good to meet him. "You too," Daniels said, extending a hand for a shake. "Like I said, my friends won't..." But he pulled back, hissing as the needle pierced him. "What's wrong?" B50967 asked, pulling his hand back as the man shook. "Nothing," Daniels said, sucking the spot on his hand. "Must have gotten a static shock or something. Take care, my friend," he said, walking off to the counter as B50967 resumed his seat. He was still sitting there when someone yelled from the back, and another called a medical emergency code overhead. He had already dropped the needle by then, so they wouldn't find anything to link him back to the poisoning. The needle was from a hypo he had managed to get his hands on, and he had loaded it with enough fentanyl to kill a grown man. He wondered what they would make of it when they did a tox screen, and figured Daniels would probably be dead before the response team got there. He had heard of less killing people faster, and he doubted that they would think to use Narcan on him before it was too late. When the guard came to take the rest of them out, saying medical callouts were canceled, B50967 got up placidly and followed them out. 3 down, 9 to go. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.